Yes, okay, so according to my phone, we are live. So I will keep this here to check for any comments. So thank you for joining me, and if you are watching the replay, let me know if you've got any questions, because what we're going to speak about is really important today. So, also, if you know someone who has been in self-development, healing, or transformation for years, and is dealing with the same patterns that they've been trying to overcome for all this time, send them this, or stay if it's you. I'm Judy V, and I'm founder of the Codex system, a structural model of human behavior. And what I'm about to say cuts across one of the most repeated ideas in this space. Change your frequency, change your life. It sounds powerful. It sounds clean. It sounds like truth. It sounds beautiful, it sounds elegant, it sounds simple, spiritual, like wisdom, but it is not. Worse than that, it is not harmless either. It has become one of the central promises of self-help and personal development. But there's a problem. If that sentence were true in the way people repeat it, more people would be free by now. But they're not. People have spent years trying to raise their frequency, think better thoughts, feel better feelings, feel higher feelings, manage their state, protect their energy, stay in gratitude, stay in abundance, stay in a state of love. It's all love. Stay in high frequency, in abundance, and over again, but yet the patterns still repeat. The same relationship loop, the same money ceiling, the same collapse under pressure, the same sabotage, the same compensation, the same behavior, just all in a different language over and over again. And this should tell us something. It should tell us the model is wrong. Because people can explain their patterns. I'm seeing it more and more and more online at the moment. People explaining their patterns, frustrated that they're able to articulate it with great finesse and in extraordinary detail, but yet still repeat them for years, over and over and over again. The important part about that is that that's not a small thing. That is evidence. It is evidence that insight is not where behavior is generated. It is evidence that emotional state is not the deepest explanation either. This is where the distortion begins, because change your frequency, change your life sounds empowering, but here's what it does. Here's what it actually does. It shifts the burden back onto you. And that burden then compounds. Because once you accept the premise that every repeated pattern becomes evidence that you have failed to manage yourself correctly, if life is not changing, it must be your frequency. If the result is not here, it must be your state. If the same loop returns, it must be because you dropped, doubted, feared, or could not hold the right energy for long enough. So instead of questioning the model, people start questioning themselves. The pattern remains, but now you introduce a good dollop of shame, extra vigilance, more self-monitoring, more layers get layered on top, and that's how the burden deepens and you loop again. If your life is not changing, you must not be in the right frequency, is the lie. If the relationship keeps failing, you must have dropped your state, that's a lie. If money is not moving, maybe you're in scarcity, that's another lie. If the same pattern keeps returning, maybe you've not healed enough, aware enough, embodied enough, regulated enough, positive enough. These are all lies. So now you're living in a state of permanent self-correction, where you monitor your thoughts. You're permanently monitoring your energy, monitoring your emotions, correcting yourself constantly. So that you don't fall out of alignment, so you don't do or attract the wrong thing. That is not liberation. That is not freedom. That is vigilance with a prettier language. So now the person becomes responsible, or now you do become responsible, not just for living, but for continuously managing your internal state. Can you see how that is robbing you of an experience of life to live the fullest? So now you're continuously managing your internal state in order to deserve a better reality. That is not freedom. That is permanent self-monitoring. And many people don't even realize that they have entered this self-perpetuating loop. The model sounds empowering at first, but what it actually produces is, in most people, is vigilance, and that's not truth. That is behavioral tension with a spiritual language on top. And something else that I've noticed, that it really is gathering momentum at the moment. It's something else is happening at the moment. I'm seeing it in Facebook groups. I'm seeing it on Substack posts and articles. I am seeing it more and more. Even inside this space, people are starting to notice. They're doing everything they've been told. They're meditating, visualization, raising frequency, shifting state. And their lives are not structurally different, and people are beginning to ask why. They feel different for a minute. They feel different with this one or that model or whatever for a minute. They understand more. They can explain themselves better. But they're still making the same decisions. Still having the same responses, reactions. Still ending up with the same outcomes. And the conclusion many people are starting to reach is, maybe the seeking is the problem. But then that's where it stalls, because removing the practice does not remove the pattern. So now they drop the tools, but the behavior is still there, which tells you something even more precise. The issue was never your frequency, or your mindset, or your level of awareness. The issue is that behavior is not being generated where you've been told it is. So you've been trying to change something upstream that isn't the source. And that's why you can feel high and still choose the same thing, feel clear and still repeat the same pattern, feel expanded, you felt it, feeling that feeling of expansion, you felt it with the work that you're doing, but still collapse in the same moments when the pressure rises. Because state does not reorganize what is producing the behavior. That is the part the current conversation cannot finish. People can see that there's something off but cannot explain why. So whilst that model sounds empowering for a minute, it fails to answer the most obvious question. Why do people keep doing what they do even when they understand it? Why can someone see the pattern clearly and still repeat it? Why can someone who's had years of therapy, years of insight, years of self-awareness, and still find themselves in the exact same loop under pressure? When someone can have phenomenal emotional intelligence and still collapse in the same moment, in the same pattern, under the same pressure. Because behavior is not primarily generated by insight. The industry keeps mistaking description for explanation. It describes the pattern, it can name the feeling, it can name the belief, the trauma, the attachment style, the identity, but it cannot explain why the pattern keeps taking form. Because description is not generation. Insight explains what is happening. It does not necessarily change what keeps happening. And once you can see that, a lot of the current model starts collapsing very quickly. The truth is, most people are not stuck or trapped or looping because they've failed to understand themselves. They're stuck, trapped, looping, because understanding is not where the behavior is being organized. This is why change of frequency has become a seductive, dangerous trap. It gives you something to do. It gives you something to monitor, something to perfect, something to manage. But effort then becomes permanent, and life becomes about management rather than living. That's the tragedy of it. That's the damage of it. And when then nothing fundamentally changes, they blame themselves instead of questioning the premise, questioning the model. Because if the pattern remains after insight, then insight's not the source of the pattern. If the pattern remains after emotional awareness is not the source either. So what most of the frequency conversation does is it names the states: fear, love, shame, abundance, joy, scarcity. But it does not identify what is actually producing the repeated behavioral output. That's the flaw. So people spend years trying to maintain a state while the underlying organization generating the pattern remains untouched. And when the pattern returns, they don't question the model, they question themselves. I'm not good enough, not clever enough, not worthy enough, not enough. And this is why the premise has done so much damage. I'm not saying there's no such thing as energetic reality. That's not what I'm saying. But because this simplification of it is false. Frequency is a consequence, not source. It turns into a far deeper human question, or it turns a far deeper human question into a self-correction loop, and then calls that freedom. So for me, the question is not, and neither for you, it must not be what frequency are you in. The real question is, what is generating the repeated behavior? What is organizing the response? What is happening underneath the insight? What is happening underneath the intention? What is happening underneath what you can already explain? Because once you see that clearly, the entire conversation changes. So it's not frequency, and it's not mindset, and it's not awareness. What actually is generating behavior? And that is what I want to, or what I am, interrupting. The question, what is generating repeated behavior? What is organizing the response? What is taking over under pressure? What is producing the same output even after awareness, insight, intention, effort, management, over and over again for years in different forms with different costumes? And until that question is answered, people will keep circling the same pattern with better, more sophisticated, more elegant words or descriptions. And that is what I am disrupting. It's time for that to end. So I'm going to be doing a deep dive in a couple of weeks' time. Why you do what you do and why insight hasn't changed it. Because people can explain their patterns in detail and still repeat them for years. That's not failure of intelligence. That's not failure of awareness or effort or management. It is evidence that behavior is not primarily a psychological story. I have researched this, lived this, monitored, observed it, tracked it, proven it for almost 3 decades now. Something deeper is generating it. It is evidence that insight is not where behavior is generated. And in this deep dive, I will be taking this apart properly. I will be going beyond the old model. Not from the usual angle, not more mindset, not more healing loops, not more identity work, no more emotional state management. In fact, zero management. Because the management that we are all being taught to do is what's robbing us of living the expression of our life. I'll be showing a different explanation, an explanation that begins with a very uncomfortable fact. That understanding yourself does not necessarily change what keeps happening. And if that's true, we need a different model. One that actually addresses why patterns keep repeating, even in people who are intelligent, self-aware, deeply familiar with their own history. So if you're tired of understanding yourself and still ending up in the same place, if you're tired of being told to think better, feel better, regulate better, integrate better, raise your frequency, and somehow make that the answer. So if you're someone who has done a lot of work and still find yourself asking, why do I still do this? Why does this keep repeating? Why can I see it so clearly and still not stop it? Why has all this insight not changed a thing sustainably? Then join me. Because that question deserves a real answer. Those questions deserve real answers. Not another instructions to think better, not more instructions to feel better, or maintain a better frequency or a higher frequency. So on 21st of April, the deep dive, why you do what you do and why insight hasn't changed it. Because this conversation needs to move beyond advice. It needs a different model. So if this hits something for you, if you see yourself in what I spoke about today, the deep dive is on the 21st of April. Why you do what you do and why insight hasn't changed it. That's where I'll take this much further, much deeper. And what you get from this deep dive is not another technique. You get a different level of explanation, one that shows you why the pattern stayed and why insight did not change it, and why the old model keeps sending you back to yourself as the problem, which is a lie. So join me on the 21st of April for the deep dive. And if you would love the link to join, just let me know in the comments. I want to join. Let me know, and I will send you the link. This will be a deep dive where I will dive into what the source is, what's really going on. No method, no management, no effort. I look forward to seeing you there. If you want the link, just let me know in the comments. If you're watching the replay, got any questions, let me know. I see there's some people here. Hi, Hind, how are you? I haven't seen you forever. So powerful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe I will see you at the deep dive as well. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you on the deep dive.